The rain hammered against the weathered boards of the ranch house like bullets from heaven. Each drop a reminder of how alone Sarah Whitlow had become in this God-forsaken stretch of land beneath Red Rock. She stood at the window, watching the storm turn the dirt road into a river of mud, her fingers absently tracing the cold glass where her breath had fogged it up. 2 years. 2 years since they'd buried James in the hard ground behind the hill, and still the people of Mercy's Bend whispered about the cold widow who kept to herself like a ghost. The fire in the hearth crackled, throwing dancing shadows across the sparse room. Sarah had learned to find comfort in simple things: the steady rhythm of rain, the warmth of flame, the routine of tending to what was left of the ranch. The townsfolk could whisper all they wanted. They hadn't seen James's blood seeping into the earth over a patch of disputed land that wasn't worth a man's life. They hadn't held his hand as the light faded from his eyes, promising him she'd keep the ranch running even as her heart shattered into pieces too small to ever mend. A sudden pounding at the door jarred her from her thoughts. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to the shotgun propped against the wall. Nobody came calling in weather like this, not unless they were running from something or someone. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. No answer came, just another heavy thud against the door, this time followed by the unmistakable sound of a body sliding down the wood. Sarah gripped the shotgun tighter, approaching the door with cautious steps, through a crack in the shutters. She could make out a figure slumped against her porch, a dark horse standing patient in the downpour beyond. Lightning illuminated the scene for a brief moment. A man, his clothes soaked through, one hand pressed against his side where a dark stain spread across his shirt, against every instinct screaming at her to bar the door and wait for daylight. Sarah found herself lifting the heavy wooden beam. The door swung open, and the stranger tumbled forward, barely conscious. She caught him before he hit the floor, the metallic scent of blood filling her nostrils. "Please," he muttered through gritted teeth, his voice rough as gravel. "Just need shelter." Sarah hesitated, a wounded stranger at her door in the middle of a storm. It was like something out of the dime novels she used to read before life taught her that real stories rarely had happy ending. But leaving a man to die on her porch would make her no better than the vultures who'd circled after James's death, trying to pick apart what he'd built. "Can you walk?" she asked. He nodded, though his legs seemed to have other ideas. Together, they stumbled toward the fire, Sarah bearing most of his weight. She eased him onto the wooden bench near the hearth, trying not to notice how his presence filled the room in a way it hadn't been filled in years. In the firelight, she got her first good look at him, dark hair plastered to his head by rain and sweat, a face that might have been handsome if not for the pain etched across it, and eyes the color of storm clouds that watched her with a mixture of wariness and gratitude. He was tall, broad-shouldered, built like a man who'd spent his life working with his hands or his gun, probably both. "Name's Colton Graves," he managed between labored breaths. "New sheriff, appointed to Mercy's Bend." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Sheriff without a badge?" A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. "In my saddlebags. Didn't think bleeding to death was the best way to make an introduction." She moved to examine his wound, carefully pulling back the torn fabric. A bullet had carved a deep furrow along his ribs, not fatal if treated, but dangerous enough if left to fester. "You'll need that cleaned and dressed," she said, her tone matter of fact. Years of ranch life had taught her to deal with injuries without flinching. "I've got some whiskey and clean cloth." "Appreciate it, ma'am. Mrs. Whitlow," she corrected automatically, then wondered why she'd bothered. What did it matter what a stranger called her? As she gathered supplies, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. His clothes, though rain-soaked and bloody, were well made, too well made for a lawman's salary. And there was something in the way he moved, even injured, that spoke of a man accustomed to violence, to being hunted or doing the hunting. "Who shot you? Sheriff Graves?" she asked as she returned with a bottle of whiskey and torn strips of clean linen. His jaw tightened. Men who didn't want a new sheriff in town. It was an answer that said nothing while pretending to say everything. Sarah had lived in these parts long enough to know when a man was dancing around the truth. But she also knew better than to press. Everyone out here had secrets. Some were just bloodier than others. She worked in silence, cleaning the wound with practiced efficiency. Colton bore it stoically, only the white-knuckled grip on the bench betraying his pain. As she wrapped the bandage around his ribs, her fingers brushed against old scars, too many for a lawman. Unless he'd been wearing a badge in hell itself. "There," she said, stepping back. "That should hold if you don't move around too much. Thank you." His gray eyes found hers, and for a moment, something passed between them. Not quite trust, but an acknowledgement of mutual need. He needed shelter. She needed... what? Company? Protection? Or just the simple human comfort of not being alone while the storm raged outside? Sarah busied herself stoking the fire, trying to ignore how aware she'd become of his presence. The room felt smaller with him in it, the air charged with something more than just the electricity of the storm. "Your husband," Colton said after a long silence. "He the one who built this place." "How did you said Mrs. Whitlow, but you're alone out here." His voice was gentle, not pressing. "2 years passed," she said simply. "Land dispute got settled with bullets instead of words. I'm sorry." She shrugged, a gesture meant to convey indifference she didn't feel. "It's the way of things out here. The strong take from the weak, and the dead don't get a vote." "Maybe that's why they sent a new sheriff." Sarah turned to study him again. There was something in his voice when he said it. Not quite bitterness, but close. She noticed his gun belt hanging by the door, the holster worn smooth from use. The gun itself was a fine piece, but someone had tried to file away what looked like notches on the grip. A lawman's gun shouldn't need its history erased. "You running from something, Mr. Graves?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. His smile was sharp as a blade. "Aren't we all Mrs. Whitlow?" The storm picked up fury, rattling the windows in their frames. Sarah pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "You can stay until the weather breaks. There's a cot in the back room, used to be for the ranch hands when we could afford them." "I don't want to impose. You already have." She cut him off. "Might as well see it through." He struggled to his feet, swaying slightly. Sarah moved instinctively to steady him, her hand on his arm. Through the wet fabric, she could feel the solid muscle beneath, the heat of him despite the cold rain. It had been so long since she'd touched another person with anything resembling tenderness that the simple contact sent an unexpected jolt through her. "Easy," she murmured, guiding him toward the back room. The space was small but clean, with a narrow cot and a single window that looked out onto the endless prairie. Sarah lit the oil lamp on the rickety side table, casting a warm glow across the rough-hewn walls. "This will do fine," Colton said, easing himself onto the cot with a barely suppressed groan. "I'll leave you to rest." She turned to go, but his voice stopped her. "Why did you let me in?" Sarah paused in the doorway, considering. "Maybe because I'm tired of keeping everything out," she said finally. "Good night, Sheriff." As she returned to the main room, Sarah tried to convince herself that sheltering a wounded stranger was just basic Christian charity, nothing more. But as she banked the fire for the night and listened to the storm rage outside, she couldn't deny the truth that whispered in her heart. For the first time in 2 years, the house didn't feel quite so empty, and that terrified her more than any number of armed men at her door. The wind howled through the valley like a living thing, and somewhere in the back room, a stranger who might not be what he claimed to be settled into uneasy sleep. Sarah sat by the dying fire, her shotgun across her lap, and wondered if she'd just made the best or worst decision of her life. Time would tell, as it always did out here in the unforgiving land beneath red rock. But for now, for this one night, she wasn't alone, and that was enough. The morning sun crept across the prairie like a cautious visitor, painting the wet earth gold after the storm's fury. Sarah woke to find Colton already up, standing at the kitchen window with his shirt half-buttoned, watching the horizon with the vigilance of a man who'd learned to expect trouble from any direction. "You should be resting," she said, noting how he favored his wounded side. He turned, offering a slight smile. "Old habits. Besides, that fence by your barn needs mending before your cattle find their way to Mexico." Sarah followed his gaze to where a section of fence had collapsed during the night. "I can manage." "I'm sure you can." He moved toward his gun belt hanging by the door. "But I'm here, and I pay my debts." Over the next week, Colton made himself useful in ways Sarah hadn't expected. Despite his injury, he worked with quiet efficiency, repairing not just the fence but the barn door that had been sticking, the loose boards on the porch, the chicken coop that leaked. He moved like a man who understood labor, his hands sure and steady whether holding a hammer or a gun. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, sharing simple meals of beans and biscuit, sometimes venison when Colton returned from hunting with game slung over his shoulder. Conversation came easier than Sarah had anticipated, perhaps because neither pressed the other for more than they were willing to give. "You know your way around a ranch," she observed one night as he cleaned his rifle with practiced movements. "Grew up on one, back in Missouri." His eyes stayed on his work. "Before the war changed everything." Which side? The question mattered out here, where old loyalties died hard. "Does it matter now?" He looked up then, those storm-gray eyes holding hers. "We all did things we're not proud of. Some of us just wear our sins more visibly than others." Sarah understood that. Her own sins might not show in scars and gunpowder, but they were there, in the relief she'd felt mixed with her grief when James died, in the nights she'd lain awake wishing she'd married for love instead of survival. "My husband was a good man," she said, not sure why she felt compelled to share. "But we married because it made sense, not because our hearts demanded it. I was 17, and my father owed money to the wrong people. James offered a solution, and you've been paying for that practical decision ever since." It wasn't a question. Sarah poured more coffee, using the motion to hide her reaction to his perception. "We all make choices. Some chains we forge ourselves, and some we break." Colton's voice held an edge of something, determination maybe, or desperation. That night, she heard him pacing in his room, the floorboards creaking under his restless movement. Sarah lay in her own bed, listening to the sound of another human being under her roof, and tried not to think about how natural it had become, having him here. The following evening, wolves came down from the hills. Sarah heard them first, that long, mournful howl that made every animal on the ranch tense with primal fear. She grabbed her shotgun and headed for the door, but Colton was already there, rifle in hand. "Stay inside," he ordered. "Like hell. Those are my cattle." They moved together toward the barn, where the sounds of panic rose from the penned animals. In the moonlight, Sarah could see dark shapes circling, yellow eyes gleaming with hunger. Colton raised his rifle, the shot cracking through the night air. One wolf dropped, another shot, another casualty. The pack scattered, melting back into the darkness like smoke. "Good shooting," Sarah said, impressed despite herself. "Had plenty of practice." There was no pride in his voice, just fact. As they checked the animals, making sure none were injured, Sarah noticed the way Colton moved. Alert, deadly. Every sense attuned to danger. This wasn't just a lawman's training. This was something deeper, learned in harder schools than any sheriff's office. "Who were you before?" she asked softly. "Before the badge?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, barely above a whisper, "Someone who thought justice came from the barrel of a gun. Took me too long to learn that revenge and justice aren't the same thing. And now I'm trying to be better than I was." He met her eyes in the moonlight. "Some days I almost believe it's possible." They were standing close in the barn's doorway, close enough that Sarah could see the weariness in his face, the weight of whatever ghosts haunted him. Without thinking, she reached up to touch the scar on his jaw, a thin white line nearly hidden by stubble. "How'd you get this one?" His hand covered hers, warm and calloused. Man in Abilene took exception to me bringing in his brother, used a broken bottle. He turned her hand over, studying it in the dim light. Your hands tell stories too. These aren't the soft hands of a woman who's had an easy life. Nothing about life out here is easy. She should pull away. Knew she should. But something kept her frozen in place. We adapt, or we die. Or we find something worth living for again. The air between them crackled with possibility and danger. Sarah felt herself swaying toward him, drawn by something stronger than wisdom. But the sound of a coyote in the distance broke the spell, and she stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. We should get back inside. Colton nodded, but she caught the flash of something in his eyes, disappointment maybe, or relief, perhaps both. The next day brought riders from town. Sarah recognized Tom Morrison, who ran the general store, and beside him a man she didn't know, tall and lean with the calculating look of a banker or politician. Mrs. Whitlow. Morrison greeted nervously. This here's Mr. William Harker. He's been asking about your land. Sarah's spine stiffened. She'd heard the name, a man who'd been buying up property all along the valley, usually from widows and broken men who had no choice but to sell. My land's not for sale. Mr. Harker. Harker smiled, the expression never reaching his cold blue eyes. Everything's for sale. Mrs. Whitlow. It's just a matter of price. You heard the lady? Colton stepped out from the barn, rifle casual in his hands. Seems like this conversation's over. Harker's eyes narrowed, taking in Colton's presence. And you are? Someone who doesn't like men who can't take no for an answer. The tension stretched taut between them. Morrison shifted nervously in his saddle, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. I don't believe we've been introduced, Harker said slowly. I know everyone in these parts, but you're new. Colton Graves, new sheriff of Mercy's Bend. Funny, I heard the town council hadn't approved any new appointments. Colton's smile was sharp. Must have missed that meeting. Harker studied him for a long moment, then turned back to Sarah. You think about my offer, Mrs. Whitlow. A woman alone out here, well, accidents happen. Wouldn't want to see this nice ranch fall into disrepair. Or worse. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Sarah felt Colton tense beside her, his hand shifting on the rifle. Is that a threat, Mr. Harker? She asked, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her stomach. Just a friendly observation. Harker touched his hat brim. Good day, ma'am. Sheriff. After they'd gone, Sarah sank onto the porch steps, her hands shaking slightly. Colton sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. He's not going to stop, she said quietly. Men like that never do. James found that out the hard way. Was Harker involved in your husband's death? Sarah shrugged. Could never prove it. The men who shot James were drifters, passing through. Convenient. How they left town right after. And now he's coming for you. For the land, I'm just an inconvenience. She laughed bitterly. James died for this patch of dirt, and now they want me to just hand it over. Colton was quiet for a moment. Then, you could leave, start fresh somewhere else. Sarah looked at him sharply. Is that what you did? Run from whatever you were? Sometimes running is the only way to stop becoming the monster you're chasing. And sometimes standing your ground is the only way to stay human. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face. You're stronger than you know. Sarah Whitlow. It was the first time he'd used her given name. The sound of it in his rough voice sent warmth through her that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. That evening, as they prepared supper together, a simple dance of reaching and passing, of shared space and comfortable silence, Sarah found herself stealing glances at him, the way he moved with economical grace, the way his hands were gentle with the dishes despite their obvious capability for violence, the way he hummed tunelessly while he worked. You're staring, he said without turning around. Heat flooded her cheeks. Just wondering when you're planning to leave. Your wound's mostly healed. He turned then, leaning against the counter. You want me gone? The question hung between them. loaded with more than its simple words. Sarah met his eyes, seeing in them a loneliness that matched her own. "No," she admitted quietly. "God help me, but no." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes. He crossed to her, moving slowly as if approaching a spooked horse. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "This is dangerous," he murmured. "I'm dangerous." "I know." She leaned into his touch, starved for it. "I don't care." "You should." But he was leaning closer, his breath warm against her face. "I've got blood on my hands. Sarah, more than you can imagine. We've all got blood on our hands out here. The only question is whether we let it drown us or wash us clean." He made a sound, part laugh, part groan, and then his mouth was on hers, hungry and desperate. Sarah clutched at his shoulders, pouring 2 years of loneliness and grief and need into the kiss. He backed her against the wall, his body pressing into hers, and she felt alive in a way she'd forgotten was possible. But as suddenly as it began, he pulled away, breathing hard. "I can't. Not like this. You deserve better than what I am." Before she could respond, he was gone, the door closing behind him with quiet finality. Sarah stood there, lips still tingling, heart racing, and wondered if she'd just lost something she'd never really had. Outside, she heard him chopping wood with violent intensity, each strike of the axe like a punishment. She touched her lips, still feeling the ghost of his kiss, and made a decision. Whatever Colton Graves was running from, whatever sins he carried, she wasn't going to let him face them alone, because somewhere between the storm that brought him to her door and this moment of almost, she'd done the one thing she'd sworn never to do again. She'd started to fall in love. The morning after their kiss, Colton was gone. His bed was made with military precision, and only a note remained on the kitchen table. "Thank you for everything. Stay safe. C.G." Sarah crumpled the paper in her fist, anger and hurt warring in her chest. She'd opened her heart, just a crack, and he'd run like a spooked Mustang. Fine. She'd survived worse abandonment. But as the days passed, the harassment began. First, it was small things. A gate left open, allowing her chickens to scatter. Then her water barrel was tipped over in the night. By the 3rd day, she found one of her cattle dead, shot clean through the head, left as a message she couldn't misread. Sarah buried her pride along with the cow and rode into Mercy's Bend. The town sprawled along the single main street like a dirty secret, all false fronts and broken dreams. She stopped at Morrison's store for supplies, ignoring the whispers that followed her. "Heard you had some trouble out your way," Morrison said carefully as he measured out flour. "News travels fast. Mister, Harker's been asking about you, says he's worried about a woman alone. Mister, Harker can save his worry for someone who wants it." Sarah paid for her goods and left, but she could feel eyes on her from every window. The sheriff's office was closed. No surprise there. The last sheriff had disappeared a month ago, another convenient absence when Harker wanted something. Sarah was about to head home when she remembered Colton's scrawled note on that first night, the address he'd written. It led her to the edge of town, to a saloon that looked like it had seen better decades. The broken wheel squatted on the outskirts like a guilty conscience, its paint peeling and sign hanging crooked, the kind of place decent women didn't enter, which made it perfect for a man who didn't want to be found. Sarah pushed through the doors into dim, smoke-filled air. The conversation died as every head turned her way. She spotted him immediately, alone at a corner table, a bottle of whiskey and a single glass his only companions. "You lost, ma'am?" the bartender called out, not unkindly. "No." She walked straight to Colton's table, aware of every eye following her. "I'm exactly where I mean to be." Colton looked up, and she saw the flash of surprise before his face shuddered. "Sarah, you shouldn't be here." "Neither should you. Yet here we are." She sat down uninvited. Up close, she could see he hadn't been sleeping. Stubble darkened his jaw, and his clothes looked like he'd been living in them. "Harker's men killed one of my cattle." His hand tightened on the glass. "When?" "3 nights ago. Night after you left. I'm not the sheriff, remember? Just a man passing through." "Don't!" The word came out sharp enough to cut. "Don't pretend you don't care. I saw your face when Harker threatened me. Caring and being able to do something about it are 2 different things." He poured another drink, the bottleneck clicking against the glass. "You want to know the truth? The whole truth?" "Yes." He laughed, short and bitter. "I was part of the Graves gang. Heard of them? Train robbers, bank thieves, killers when the money demanded it. That was me for 10 years. Colton Graves, fastest gun in 3 states, worth $5,000 dead or alive." Sarah kept her face carefully neutral, though her heart was racing. She'd heard of the Graves gang. Everyone had. They'd been legends of a sort, brutal and efficient. "What changed?" "I did, or tried to." He met her eyes then, and she saw the raw pain there. "Last job went wrong. There was a family on the train, caught in the crossfire, a little girl." His voice broke. "She had ribbons in her hair. Yellow ribbons. She died in her mother's arms while I counted money. So you quit. Quit, ran, tried to disappear. Even got myself appointed sheriff in a town that didn't ask too many questions. Thought maybe I could balance the scales." He smiled without humor. "But men like me don't get to be redeemed. Sarah, we just get to choose how we fall." "That's not true." "Isn't it? I'm sitting here drowning in whiskey while Harker threatens you. Some protector I turned out to be." Sarah reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "You're not that man anymore. The blood doesn't wash off that easy. Then help me, not as a sheriff, not as whatever you were, just as a man who knows the difference between right and wrong." He turned his hand over, interlacing their fingers. "Harker's got at least 12 men. I'm 1 gun, and a wanted one at that. Then we'll have to be smarter than them." For a long moment, he studied her. Then, finally, he nodded. "All right, but we do this my way." They left the saloon together, ignoring the stares and whispers. As they walked to where Sarah had tied her horse, a man stepped out of the alley, one of Harker's hired guns. She recognized him from the ranch. "Mr. Harker wants to know if you've reconsidered his offer. Mrs. Whitlow." "Tell Harker," Colton started, but Sarah put a hand on his arm. "Tell Mr. Harker," she said coolly, "that my answer remains the same, and if any more of my cattle die mysteriously, I'll take it as an act of war." The man grinned, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "War's a dangerous game for a widow to play. Good thing I'm not playing." Colton helped her mount her horse, his hands lingering on her waist. "That was either very brave or very stupid," he murmured. "Probably both." She looked down at him. "Are you coming?" He swung up onto his own horse. She noticed he'd been keeping it saddled and ready. Old habits. They rode out of town side by side, and Sarah felt something shift between them. Partnership, maybe, or just 2 lonely people deciding to stop running from different things. Back at the ranch, they sat at her kitchen table like war generals planning a campaign. "Harker's smart," Colton said, sketching a rough map. "He won't come at you direct, not yet. He'll escalate slowly, make life miserable until you're begging to sell. So, we need evidence, something to take to a real lawman. The nearest federal marshal is 3 days' ride. By the time he got here..." Colton shook his head. "We need something else. Leverage." "What kind of leverage?" His smile was all wolf. "The kind men like Harker always have. Bodies they've buried, deals they've made. Everyone's got secrets out here." Over the next days, they worked together like they'd been doing it for years. Colton taught her to shoot better, to think tactically. They reinforced the ranch's defenses, set up watch rotations, and in the quiet moments, over shared meals, during long evenings by the fire, they talked. "Why didn't you remarry?" Colton asked one night as they cleaned weapons. "Pretty woman like you must have had offers." Sarah considered her answer. "At first, I was too angry, then too tired, and then..." She shrugged. Then I got used to being alone. It's safer, lonelier. That too. She glanced at him. What about you? Ever have someone? Once, before I went bad. He worked oil into the rifle's action with practiced movements. Her name was Mary, preacher's daughter, if you can believe it. She tried to save me, but I was too young and stupid to be saved. What happened to her? Married a shopkeeper. Had 6 kids last I heard. Better life than I could have given her. Sarah heard the regret in his voice. The road not taken. We can't change the past? No, but we can try not to repeat it. He set the rifle aside, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. I shouldn't have left the other morning. No, you shouldn't have. I was trying to protect you. From me, from what's coming for me. I don't need protecting. She moved closer, drawn by the gravity of him. I need something else. Sarah. Her name was a warning on his lips. I know what you are, she said softly. I know what you've done. I don't care. You should, but I don't. She reached up, tracing that scar on his jaw. Whatever's coming, we face it together, or not at all. This time when he kissed her, there was no desperation in it, just a slow, deep claiming. Sarah melted into him, letting herself feel for the first time in years. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she saw her own wonder reflected in his eyes. Together, he agreed roughly. God help us both. That night, as they kept watch from the porch, a fire bloomed on the horizon, the old shack where Sarah stored winter hay, burning like a beacon. Colton's arm came around her, solid and reassuring. It's starting, she said quietly. Let them come. His voice was hard as iron. I've been running for 3 years. I'm done running. Sarah leaned into him, watching her hay burn, and felt something fierce rise in her chest. Harker thought she was just another weak widow to be pushed around. He was about to learn different. Because now she had something she hadn't had before, someone worth fighting beside. The war for her land had begun, but for the first time since James died, Sarah wasn't facing it alone. And that made all the difference. The mountain trail wound through pine and aspen like a snake through bones, each turn revealing another vista of hostile beauty. Sarah pulled her coat tighter against the biting wind, grateful for the warmth of her horse beneath her. Ahead, Colton studied the ground with the intensity of a man reading scripture. 3 riders, he said quietly. Maybe 4 hours ahead. 1 horse is carrying heavy, probably supplies. They'd been tracking Harker's men for 2 days, following whispers and rumors to a hidden canyon where supposedly illegal goods were stored. It was Colton's idea. Find evidence of Harker's other activities. Use it as leverage to make him back off. How much further? Sarah asked, her breath misting in the cold air. Another hour? Maybe 2. He looked at the darkening sky, heavy with the promise of snow. We should find shelter soon. Storm's coming. As if in answer, the first fat flakes began to fall. Within minutes, the gentle snowfall had become a blinding white wall. Sarah could barely see Colton just yards ahead. There! He pointed through the swirling snow to a dark shape against the mountainside. An old trapper's cabin, abandoned but still standing. They fought their way to it, the wind trying to tear them from their saddles. By the time they stumbled through the door, both were covered in snow, shaking with cold. The cabin was small, 1 room with a stone fireplace, a narrow cot, and not much else. But it had walls and a roof, and that was enough. Colton immediately set about building a fire while Sarah tended to the horses, bringing them into the lean-to attached to the cabin. When she returned, he had a small blaze going, the warmth like a blessing. We'll have to wait it out, he said, feeding another piece of wood to the flames. Could be hours, could be morning. Sarah nodded, peeling off her wet coat and hanging it near the fire. The cabin was warming quickly, the single room trapping heat efficiently. Too efficiently. She was suddenly very aware of how small the space was, how close they'd have to be. Hungry? Colton produced some jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags. They ate in companionable silence, sitting close to the fire. Outside, the storm howled like a living thing, making the cabin walls creak. Sarah shivered despite the warmth. Cold? Colton asked. No, just remembering another storm. The night James died. She hadn't meant to say it, but something about the intimacy of their situation loosened her tongue. It was snowing then, too. I remember thinking how peaceful it looked. All that white covering the blood. Colton moved closer, his arm coming around her shoulders. You don't have to talk about it. Maybe I need to. She leaned into him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. We'd been arguing about selling, about staying, about children we'd never have. He stormed out, said he was going to settle things with the men who'd been pressuring us. I should have stopped him. It wasn't your fault, wasn't it? I was relieved when he left. Relieved to have the argument over. Relieved to be alone. She laughed bitterly. I got my wish. 2 hours later, they brought his body back. Colton's arm tightened around her. Guilt's a poison. Sarah, I know. I've swallowed enough of it to kill a normal man. She turned to look at him, seeing her own pain reflected in his eyes. How do you live with it? You find reasons to keep going. Small ones at first. Finish this job. Ride to the next town. Then maybe, if you're lucky, you find a bigger reason. His hand came up to cup her cheek. Someone worth being better for. The firelight danced across his features, softening the hard lines, making him look younger, more vulnerable. Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of bonds she'd tied tight for 2 years. Colton, she whispered. I know. His thumb stroked across her cheekbone. I know. She kissed him then, pouring all her loneliness and need into the contact. He responded immediately, pulling her closer, his hands tangling in her hair. The kiss deepened, became something desperate and necessary. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Sarah made a decision. The cot's too small for 2, she said softly. But the floor by the fire. Understanding flashed in his eyes, along with something that might have been wonder. He spread their bedrolls before the hearth, creating a makeshift bed. When he turned back to her, Sarah was already working at the buttons of her dress with trembling fingers. Are you sure? He asked, voice rough. I've been sure since you kissed me in my kitchen. Maybe before that. He crossed to her in 2 strides, his hands covering hers, helping with the buttons. His touch was gentle, reverent, as if she might shatter. Sarah had expected hunger, urgency, but this careful tenderness undid her completely. They came together slowly, learning each other in the firelight. Sarah rediscovered sensations she'd forgotten, the weight of a man's body, the rasp of calloused hands on soft skin, the overwhelming intimacy of being truly seen. Colton worshipped her with touch and whispered words, erasing 2 years of loneliness with each caress. When the storm of sensation finally crested and broke, Sarah found herself crying, not from sadness, but from the sheer relief of feeling again. Colton held her through it, stroking her hair, murmuring comfort against her skin. I'm sorry, she gasped. I don't know why. Shh, nothing to be sorry for. He pulled a blanket over them, keeping her close. First time I felt anything after the gang. I broke down too. Means you're coming back to life. They lay entwined before the fire, listening to the storm rage outside. Sarah traced the scars on his chest. A map of violence survived. Tell me about this one, she said, touching a puckered mark near his ribs. Knife fight in Amarillo, disagreement over cards, and this, a long, thin line across his stomach. Barbed wire, cutting through a fence to escape a posse. Each scar had a story, each story a piece of the man he'd been. Sarah listened to them all, understanding that he was giving her his history, trusting her with his darkness. Do you regret it? She asked finally. The life you lived? Every day. He caught her hand, pressing it flat against his chest where his heart beat steady and strong. But if it led me here, to this moment, to you, then maybe it was worth something after all. They made love again as the night deepened, this time with less desperation and more joy. Sarah felt wild, free, more herself than she'd been in years, in this isolated cabin, cut off from the world by the storm. She could admit what she'd been fighting since the moment he'd collapsed on her doorstep. She loved him. Colton Graves, outlaw and killer, had somehow become essential to her as breathing. The fire had burned low when she woke, gray dawn light filtering through the single window. The storm had passed, leaving the world crystalline and new. Colton was already awake, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "Morning," she said softly, suddenly shy. "Morning." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Sarah, about last night. If you're about to apologize or tell me it was a mistake, I'll shoot you myself." That startled a laugh from him. "No, I was going to say, I love you. I know I shouldn't. No, I've got no right, but I do." The words hung between them, precious and dangerous. Sarah pulled him down for a kiss, tasting promise and peril in equal measure. "I love you too," she whispered against his lips. "God help us both." They dressed slowly, reluctant to leave their temporary paradise. But duty called. Harker's men were still out there, and the evidence they sought couldn't wait. As they saddled the horses, Colton caught her hand. "Whatever happens next, I want you to know, us. It's the first clean thing I've felt in years." Sarah squeezed his fingers. "Then let's fight to keep it." They rode out into the pristine morning, following the trail higher into the mountains. An hour later, they found what they were looking for, a hidden valley with several buildings, smoke rising from chimneys. Through Colton's field glasses, they could see men loading wagons, rifles stacked like cordwood, and what looked like cases of ammunition. "Gun running," Colton said grimly. "Probably selling to both sides of the range wars. That's federal prison if proven. So we have our leverage. Maybe we need more than just our word." He studied the layout, mind already working on possibilities. "There's a ledger house, there on the left. If Harker's smart, he keeps records. Men like him always do, insurance against their partners." Sarah's heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. This was it, their chance to end Harker's threat once and for all. "How do we get it?" Colton smiled, and it was the smile of the outlaw he'd been, dangerous and sure. Very carefully, and together. As they planned their approach, Sarah felt the weight of the moment. Last night had changed everything between them, stripping away pretense and leaving only truth. Now came the test. Could love survive in the harsh light of day, in the face of danger and uncertainty? Looking at Colton, seeing the determination in his eyes mixed with a tenderness reserved only for her, Sarah had her answer. Whatever came next, they'd face it as one. The lonely widow and the reformed outlaw, bound by love forged in firelight and sealed in storm. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist, revealing the challenges ahead. But Sarah felt no fear, only a fierce gladness. She'd been merely surviving for 2 years. Now, finally, she was ready to live again, whatever the cost. Sarah tried to maintain the facade of normalcy as she went about her ranch duties, but her mind kept drifting to that night in the mountain cabin. The memory of Colton's touch lingered on her skin like a brand, making her shiver despite the afternoon sun. She forced herself to focus on mending the chicken coop, but her hands trembled with something that had nothing to do with the work. Colton had ridden out at dawn to scout Harker's operations more thoroughly, leaving her with a kiss that promised his return and a warning to bar the doors. The emptiness of the ranch pressed against her like a physical weight. How quickly she'd grown accustomed to his presence, to the comfort of knowing she wasn't alone. The sound of approaching horses made her reach for the rifle propped against the fence, but it was only Colton, riding hard with dust clouding behind him. The grim set of his jaw told her everything before he spoke. "Harker knows we were there, found our tracks." He swung down from the saddle, immediately checking the horizon. "He's mobilizing his men. We need to be ready." "How long do we have?" "Tonight, maybe tomorrow." He caught her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Sarah, I need you to listen. There's a place, an old mine shaft about 5 miles north. If things go bad—" "No." She pulled away, anger flashing through her. "Don't you dare tell me to run. Not after—" She gestured helplessly, unable to put words to what had passed between them in that cabin. "After what?" His voice gentled. "After you let me love you. That's exactly why you need to be safe." "And what about what I need?" The words burst out of her, fierce and raw. "I need to stand my ground. I need to fight for what's mine. I need—" Her voice broke. "I need you to stop trying to protect me from living." Colton stared at her for a long moment, then pulled her into his arms. "Stubborn woman," he murmured against her hair. "All right, we make our stand together." They spent the afternoon preparing, boarding windows, checking ammunition, filling water barrels. As the sun began its descent, Colton taught her the finer points of defensive shooting. "Don't aim for the chest," he instructed, adjusting her grip on the rifle. "Too much can go wrong. Aim for the belly. Man shot in the gut isn't getting up to fight." His hands covered hers on the weapon, steady and sure. Sarah leaned back slightly, letting herself feel the solid wall of his chest behind her. For a moment, they stood frozen, the rifle forgotten. "Sarah," he said roughly. "This isn't the time." She turned in his arms, the rifle clattering to the ground. "When is the time? When we're dead? When they've burned everything to the ground?" She reached up, framing his face with her hands. "I won't let fear steal any more from me. Not one more minute." He kissed her then, hard and desperate, backing her against the barn wall. Sarah met his passion with her own, pouring all her fear and love and need into the contact. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she saw her own wild hunger reflected in his eyes. "Inside," he growled. They barely made it to the house, hands pulling at clothes, mouths never long apart. They came together with an urgency born of impending danger. Each touch a promise, each gasp a prayer. Sarah had never felt so alive, every nerve singing with sensation. She understood now why some creatures mated in the face of death. It was the ultimate defiance, life asserting itself against the dark. Afterwards, they lay tangled on her bed, sweat cooling on their skin. Colton traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, his touch already familiar and necessary. "I want you to know something," he said quietly. "Whatever happens tonight, this week with you has been worth everything that came before." Sarah propped herself up on an elbow, studying his face. "You're not saying goodbye." "No, I'm saying thank you." He caught her hand, pressing it to his lips. "For reminding me why men fight for things instead of just against them." The moment shattered as the sound of horses carried on the evening air. Many horses. Colton was up and dressed in seconds, Sarah right behind him. Through the window, they could see riders approaching, at least a dozen men, Harker at their head. "Bar the back door," Colton ordered, checking his guns. "Whatever happens, don't let them take you alive." The implication chilled her, but Sarah nodded. She'd heard stories of what men like Harker's hired guns did to women. Death was preferable. The riders stopped just outside rifle range. Harker rode forward alone, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "Mrs. Whitlow, I'm here with a final offer. Sign over the deed, and you can leave unharmed. You have 5 minutes to decide." "Go to hell, Harker," Sarah shouted back. 4 minutes and 50 seconds, was the calm reply. Colton positioned himself at the front window, rifle ready. "He'll send men around back. Watch for them." Sarah took her place at the kitchen window, James's old hunting rifle heavy in her hands. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. This was her land, her home. She'd die before she let them take it. "Time's up," Harker called. "Boys, burn them out." The attack came from 3 sides at once. Gunfire erupted, windows shattering under the onslaught. Sarah fired at shapes in the darkness, the rifle bucking against her shoulder. She heard Colton's weapon speaking steadily from the front room. Controlled shots finding their targets. A torch arced through the air, landing on the porch. Then another, this one catching the barn's roof. Sarah's heart clenched as she watched the flames spread, but there was no time for grief. Men were rushing the back door. She fired, saw one spin and fall. The others dove for cover. Smoke began filling the house as the porch fire spread to the walls. Her eyes streamed. Her lungs burned, but she kept shooting. "Sarah!" Colton appeared beside her, his face streaked with soot. "We can't hold. The smoke!" A bullet caught him mid-sentence, spinning him around. He crashed to the floor, blood spreading across his shirt. Sarah screamed, dropping to her knees beside him. "Go!" he gasped. "The mine? Not without you." She tore at her petticoat, pressing the fabric against the wound high on his chest. "Can you stand?" He nodded weakly. Together, they stumbled toward the root cellar, where an old tunnel led to the creek. It was their only chance. Behind them, the house was fully engulfed, flames reaching toward the stars. They emerged by the creek as their home collapsed in a shower of sparks. Sarah, half-dragged, half-carried Colton toward the horses she'd hidden in the trees for just this eventuality. Shouts and gunfire echoed behind them, Harker's men realizing their prey had escaped. "The mine," Colton mumbled. "Go to—" He went limp, unconscious. Sarah used strength she didn't know she possessed to heave him across the saddle, then mounted behind him. She rode hard through the darkness, following paths she'd learned as a girl, praying the horse wouldn't stumble. The mine was exactly where Colton had described, a dark mouth in the hillside, half hidden by brush. Sarah dragged him inside, deep enough to be hidden from casual search, by the light of a lucifer match. She examined his wound. The bullet had gone through clean, missing the lung but causing terrible damage. He was losing too much blood. Sarah worked with desperate efficiency, using whiskey from Colton's flask to clean the wound, packing it with moss like her grandmother had taught her, binding it tight with strips from her already ruined petticoat. Colton drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling her name. "Stay with me," she whispered, cradling his head in her lap. "Don't you dare leave me now. Not when I just found you." His eyes fluttered open, focusing with effort. "Beautiful Sarah. Should have stayed away." "Hush. Save your strength." "Need to tell you," he coughed, specks of blood on his lips. "The ledger, still at the camp. Without it, it doesn't matter. Does. Only way to stop him." His hand found hers, grip weak but determined. "Promise me. If I don't, promise you'll get it. Take it to the federal marshal. We'll get it together. Promise." Sarah felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "I promise, but you're going to be fine. You have to be." A ghost of his old smile crossed his face. Stubborn woman. He slipped back into unconsciousness. Sarah held him through the long night, monitoring his breathing, keeping the wound packed with moss, praying to a god she'd stopped believing in when James died. The mine was cold and damp, but she barely noticed, all her focus on the man in her arms. Dawn came slowly, gray light filtering into their refuge. Colton's fever had broken, his breathing easier. When his eyes opened, they were clear. "Still here?" he whispered. "Where else would I be?" He lifted a trembling hand to her face. "Your home is wherever you are." She caught his hand, holding it tight. "The ranch was just wood and stone. This is what's worth fighting for. Harker will think we're dead. The house burned completely. That gives us time." Colton struggled to sit up, wincing. "How bad?" "Bad enough. You need a real doctor." "No doctor would treat me, not if they knew who I was." He leaned back against the stone wall, face pale but determined. "The ledger. Sarah, it's our only chance." Sarah knew he was right. Without evidence, Harker would simply rebuild his empire, find other victims, and now, with nothing left to lose, she felt a cold clarity descend. "Then we get it," she said simply. "Together. You don't have to." She silenced him with a kiss, gentle but firm. "Yes, I do. Because I love you. Because they took everything else. Because I'm tired of men like Harker thinking they own the world." Colton studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, but we do this smart. I know where they'll have moved the ledger. Harker's got a safe in town, in the back of his legitimate business. We go at night, quiet-like. Can you ride? I'll manage. He caught her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. But Sarah, if something happens, if I go down, you run. You take whatever we've found and you run. No heroics. Same goes for you. They sealed the bargain with another kiss, this one tasting of desperation and determination in equal measure. Outside, the sun climbed higher, marking the start of a new day. Sarah looked at the man she loved, wounded but unbroken, and felt something fierce and protective rise in her chest. Harker had made a fatal mistake. He'd taken everything from her, her home, her security, her peace. But in doing so, he'd freed her from fear. She had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The widow was dead. In her place rose something harder, stronger, forged in fire and sealed in blood. And beside her, the outlaw who'd taught her that sometimes the only law that mattered was the one written in lead and courage. Together, they would bring Harker down, or die trying. 3 nights later, under a new moon that offered perfect cover, Sarah and Colton slipped into Mercy's Bend like shadows. Colton moved stiffly, his wound still tender, but his gun hand was steady. They'd spent the intervening days planning, recovering, and gathering what information they could from travelers and sympathetic ranchers who'd also suffered under Harker's reign. The town lay quiet, most honest folks long abed. Harker's office sat behind his dry goods store, a squat building that projected respectability while hiding corruption. 2 guards lounged outside, passing a bottle between them. Wait here, Colton whispered, but Sarah caught his arm. Together, remember? He smiled grimly and nodded. They circled to the alley, where Sarah had noticed a window during her last supply run, back when she'd still been just a widow trying to survive. Now she was something else entirely. The window was latched but not barred. Colton produced a thin blade, working it between the frames with practiced ease. Within moments, they were inside Harker's sanctuary. The office reeked of cigar smoke and greed. By the thin light filtering through the windows, they could see the safe, a massive iron beast squatting in the corner like a toad. Can you open it? Sarah whispered. Colton was already kneeling before it, ear pressed to the metal, fingers working the dial with delicate precision. Man I rode with taught me, said every skill might save your life someday. Sarah kept watch, James's pistol heavy in her hand. Each small click of the tumblers seemed loud as thunder. Finally, the safe door swung open with a satisfied sigh. Inside lay stacks of money, land deeds, and there, a leather-bound ledger thick with secrets. Colton grabbed it, along with several other documents that looked important. They were about to leave when Sarah noticed something else, a small photograph tucked behind the cash. It showed Harker with several other men, all well-dressed, standing before what looked like a government building. She recognized one face, Judge Carlton from the county seat. Take it, Colton urged. Might be useful. They slipped back out the window, Sarah's heart pounding with elation. They'd done it. They had the evidence. But as they reached the alley's mouth, a figure stepped out of the shadows. Going somewhere. It was Jake Morrison, one of Harker's top guns. His pistol was already drawn, aimed at Colton's chest. Jake, Colton said calmly. Been a while. Sarah's mind raced. Jake Morrison, she knew that name. Colton had mentioned him once, talking about his old life. 3 years. Morrison agreed. Heard you went soft. Graves, playing lawman. Now sneaking around like a common thief. Just evening the scales. Morrison's laugh was ugly. Mister, Harker will pay well for you. Double if you're alive. His eyes flicked to Sarah. The woman's just a bonus. Let her go. Jake, this is between us. Don't think so, mister. Harker was real specific about wanting the widow. Says she needs to learn about respect. Sarah saw Colton's hand twitch toward his gun. But Morrison was ready, his weapon steady. They were trapped. Then she remembered something, a move Colton had taught her during their long days in the mine, recovering and planning. Without thinking, she let out a sharp cry and crumpled to the ground as if fainting. Morrison's attention shifted for just an instant. It was enough. Colton's gun cleared leather with the speed that had made him legendary, the shot echoing through the alley. Morrison staggered back, looking down at the spreading red stain on his chest with surprise. "Still fast," he mumbled, then collapsed. "Move!" Colton grabbed Sarah's hand, pulling her to her feet. "Already!" Shouts were rising from the saloon down the street. They ran for the horses, the ledger clutched tight in Colton's free hand. They rode hard through the darkness, not stopping until they reached a grove of cottonwoods 5 miles outside town. Both were breathing hard, adrenaline singing through their veins. "That was clever," Colton said, checking their back trail. "The fainting. I had a good teacher." Sarah's hands were shaking now, delayed reaction setting in. "I've never seen anyone draw that fast." "Old habits." His voice was grim. "Harker knows we're alive now. He'll come hard. Then we'd better move faster." They rode through the night, pushing the horses as much as they dared. By dawn, they'd reached the abandoned stage station Colton had mentioned, a waypoint on the road to the county seat where the federal marshal kept an office. Inside the crumbling building, they finally examined their prize. The ledger was everything they'd hoped. Detailed records of bribes, gun sales to outlaws and raiders, even a list of murders made to look like accidents, including one entry that made Sarah's blood run cold. James Whitlow, obstacle to land acquisition, resolved by T. Brennan and Associates, $500 paid. She stared at her husband's name reduced to a line in a ledger, a business expense. Colton's arms came around her from behind, solid and comforting. "Now we have proof," he said quietly. "Justice for James." "I don't want justice," Sarah heard herself say. "I want vengeance." "No." He turned her to face him, hands gentle on her shoulders. "That's my old road, and it leads nowhere good. We do this legal. We take this to the marshal. Let the law handle Harker. The law let James die. Because men like Harker corrupted it. This ledger can fix that." He cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Don't become like me, Sarah. Don't let the darkness in." She saw the pain in his eyes, the weight of all his violent years. Slowly, she nodded. "All right, we do it your way." They rested a few hours, taking turns on watch. Sarah tended Colton's wound, pleased to see it healing clean despite their exertions. As she worked, he caught her hand. "When this is over," he said quietly. "What then?" "What do you mean?" "I mean us. You deserve better than a man with blood on his hands and prices on his head." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "You know what I realized when I was holding you in that mine? Thinking you might die?" He shook his head. "That I've been dead for 2 years, going through the motions, existing but not living. You changed that. You made me feel again. Anger, fear, passion, love, all of it." She linked her fingers with his. "I don't want to go back to being dead. I can't offer you much. A life on the run, maybe, always looking over our shoulders. But together, he brought their joined hands to his lips. Always. By afternoon, they were ready to ride again. The county seat lay 2 days away. 2 days of dodging Harker's men, of staying ahead of pursuit. But Sarah felt no fear, only determination. They had the evidence. They had each other. It would be enough. As they mounted up, Colton suddenly stiffened. "Riders coming. 6, maybe 7. Sarah heard them now, the thunder of hooves approaching fast. Without discussion, they spurred their horses toward the rocky hills to the north. The chase was on. For an hour they rode, using every trick Colton knew to throw off pursuit, through streams to hide their tracks, over rocky ground that wouldn't hold prints, doubling back and splitting up only to reunite miles later. But Harker's men were good, and they knew the country. "There!" Sarah pointed to a narrow canyon cutting into the hills. "I know that place. There's a path through to the other side." They plunged into the canyon, walls rising steep on either side. Behind them, gunfire echoed off the rocks. A bullet whined past Sarah's ear. Too close. Another struck sparks from the canyon wall. The path narrowed until they were riding single file. Colton behind her laying down covering fire. Sarah's horse stumbled, nearly going down, but she kept her seat through sheer will. They burst out the other side onto a plateau dotted with juniper and sage. "We can't outrun them," Colton said, reloading on the move. "Not in open country." Sarah looked around desperately. There, a cluster of rocks forming a natural fortification. "Can we make a stand?" He followed her gaze and nodded grimly. "Good as any place." They reached the rocks just as Harker's men emerged from the canyon. Sarah threw herself from the saddle, grabbing the rifle and ammunition. Colton was already in position, sighting down his weapon. "Stay down," he ordered. "Make your shots count." The outlaws spread out, approaching cautiously. Sarah recognized some faces, men who'd tipped their hats to her in town, who'd bought goods from her husband. Now they came to kill her. "Give up the ledger," one shouted. "Mister, Harker might let you live." "Tell Harker he can read it at his trial," Colton called back. The answer came in gunfire. Sarah pressed herself against the rocks, shooting when she had clear targets. The air filled with powder smoke and the whine of bullets. One outlaw went down, then another, but there were too many, and they were working around the flanks. "Sarah!" Colton's voice was strange. She turned to see blood on his sleeve. His wound had reopened, and a new bullet had found his arm. "How bad?" "I can still shoot." He proved it by dropping another attacker, but not for long. Sarah's mind raced. They were outnumbered, nearly surrounded, low on ammunition. In the dime novels, this was where the cavalry arrived. But this was real life, where good people died and evil ones prospered. No, not this time. "Cover me," she said suddenly. "What? Sarah, no!" But she was already moving, not away from danger, but toward it. She'd spotted what the outlaws hadn't, a narrow ledge running along the cliff face. It led to a position above and behind their attackers. Sarah crawled along the ledge, stones crumbling beneath her. Below, the gunfight raged. She saw Colton, magnificent even wounded, making every shot count. Her heart swelled with love and terror. She reached the position, perfect enfilading fire on the outlaws. Sarah took careful aim at the nearest man, remembering Colton's lessons. "Squeeze, don't jerk, let the shot surprise you." The outlaw spun and fell. Before his companions could react, she'd shot two more. Suddenly, the hunters were the hunted, caught between Colton's accurate fire and her elevated position. "Pull back!" someone screamed. "Pull back!" The survivors fled, leaving their dead behind. Sarah scrambled back to Colton, finding him pale but grinning. "That was insane," he said. "I learned from the best." She examined his arm, painful but not serious. "Can you ride?" "To hell if needed." He caught her hand. "Sarah, what you did is what you'd have done for me." She helped him to his feet. "Now let's finish this." They mounted up, slowly, painfully in Colton's case, and continued toward the county seat, behind them. The sun set over the battlefield, painting the rocks red as blood. They'd won this round, but Sarah knew it wasn't over. Harker would keep coming until one side was dead. But as they rode through the gathering darkness, Colton's solid presence beside her despite his wounds, Sarah felt no fear. They'd face death together and emerge stronger. Whatever came next, they'd meet it the same way, together, backs straight, guns loaded, and hearts united. The ledger tucked safe in Colton's saddlebags represented more than evidence now. It was their future, a chance at a clean life, free from the shadows of the past. All they had to do was live long enough to deliver it. 2 days to the marshal, 2 days to justice, 2 days to freedom. Sarah reached over and took Colton's good hand, their fingers interlacing as naturally as breathing. He squeezed gently. A promise without words. They rode on through the night, into whatever tomorrow would bring. The courthouse square erupted in chaos. What had started as their moment of triumph, publicly revealing Harker's crimes to the assembled townspeople, became a battlefield in seconds. Harker's men, positioned strategically throughout the crowd, opened fire at their boss's signal. Down! Colton shoved Sarah behind an overturned wagon as bullets splintered the wood above their heads. Around them, townsfolk screamed and scattered, some drawing their own weapons, choosing sides in this final confrontation. Sarah saw Tom Morrison, the shopkeeper who'd always been kind to her, take a bullet meant for a fleeing woman. Rage flooded through her as she watched him fall. These were her neighbors, innocent people caught in Harker's web of violence. The church! Colton pointed to the sturdy stone building across the square. Better cover! They ran, Sarah clutching the precious ledger to her chest. A bullet caught her sleeve, tearing fabric but missing flesh. Behind them, she heard Harker roaring orders. His veneer of respectability finally, completely shattered. Inside the church, they found unexpected allies. Reverend Mills, old but steady, held a shotgun with practiced ease. About time someone stood up to that devil, he said calmly. 3 ranchers and their hands had also taken shelter, all men who'd suffered under Harker's reign. We're outnumbered, one rancher said. Maybe 20 of them, 8 of us. 9, Sarah corrected, checking her ammunition. And we have something they don't, the truth. Half this town wants Harker gone. They just need to see it's possible. Colton, despite his wounds, took charge with the natural authority. Morrison, take the bell tower. Peters, Johnson, cover the windows. Reverend, that back door. I know my own church. Son, Mills said with a grim smile. The attack came from all sides. Windows shattered under the onslaught, raining colored glass like deadly jewels. Sarah fired steadily, picking her targets, trying not to think about the fact that each shot meant less ammunition they couldn't spare. Sarah! Colton's warning came just in time. She spun to see a man climbing through a side window, gun raised. Her shot took him center mass, and he tumbled backward into the dirt. The firefight raged, neither side able to gain clear advantage. Then Sarah heard something that chilled her blood, the crackle of flames. Smoke began seeping under the main doors. They're burning us out, someone shouted. No, Reverend Mills said firmly. They're burning God's house. That's a mistake. He strode to the pulpit, seemingly oblivious to the bullets flying around him, and began ringing the church bell with powerful strokes. The sound echoed across Mercy's Bend, a clarion call that couldn't be ignored. Sarah watched through a broken window as more townspeople emerged, many carrying weapons. The tide was turning. Harker! Colton's voice boomed out during a lull. It's over. The federal marshals have the evidence. Surrender now, and maybe you'll live to see trial. Harker's response was a laugh that held no sanity. Nothing's over. This is my town, my land. I'll see it all burn before I give it up. More gunfire, but now it came from multiple directions as townspeople joined the fight. Sarah saw the banker who'd foreclosed on struggling farmers shooting at Harker's men. The doctor who'd refused to treat injured ranchers was now treating wounded on both sides, protected by armed citizens. We need to move, Colton said urgently. The smoke was thickening despite the townspeople's efforts to control the fire. Can't help anyone if we suffocate. They prepared to make a break for it when Sarah spotted movement in the bell tower. Morrison, no, not Morrison. One of Harker's men had made it up there, was drawing a bead on Colton. Without thinking, Sarah shoved Colton aside. The bullet meant for his heart caught her instead, spinning her around. She felt the impact like a punch, then nothing but cold spreading from her side. Sarah! Colton caught her as she fell, his face a mask of anguish. No, not now, not after everything. She tried to speak, tasted copper. Around them, the battle raged on, but in their small bubble of space, there was only the two of them. Stay with me, Colton begged, pressing his hand to her wound. Please, Sarah, don't leave me. The ledger, she managed. Finish it. Together. We finish it together. Sarah wanted to argue, but darkness was creeping in from the edges. She heard Colton roar, a sound of pure rage and pain. Then the deafening report of his guns. Through blurring vision, she saw him stand over her like an avenging angel, keeping death at bay with lead and fury. Then, blessedly, new voices, authoritative, commanding. "Federal marshals! Everyone drop your weapons!" The cavalry had come at last. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness. She heard Colton threatening the doctor with dire consequences if he didn't save her, felt his hand holding hers as pain became her world, caught fragments of conversation. Harker dead, shot down as he tried to escape, his men surrendering or fleeing, the ledger in federal hands, promising justice for years of crimes. "You did it," she whispered when awareness returned. They were in the doctor's house, sunlight streaming through clean windows. Colton sat beside her bed, looking haggard but alive. "We did it." He brought her hand to his lips. "Though you nearly gave me a heart attack in the process. What were you thinking? That I couldn't lose you." Simple truth, simply stated. "Sarah Whitlow, you are the most frustrating, brave, beautiful woman I've ever known." His voice broke. "When I saw you fall. But I didn't. Takes more than one bullet to stop a ranch widow." She managed a weak smile. "How bad?" "You'll heal. Doc says you were lucky. Missed anything vital. Though you'll have a scar to match some of mine." "Good. I was feeling left out." He laughed, the sound rusty, but real. "God, I love you. Even shot and scarred?" "Especially shot and scarred. Means you're too stubborn to die." His expression grew serious. "The marshal says there's a reward for the Graves gang information. Enough to start over anywhere. And with Harker's operation exposed, his claims on the land are void. You could rebuild the ranch." Sarah studied him, seeing the careful neutrality he was trying to maintain. "What do you want?" "Whatever makes you happy." "That's not an answer." Colton sighed, looking out the window. "I want to take you somewhere we can be married proper. Somewhere no one knows who I was. Build a life without looking over our shoulders. But if you need to stay, the ranch was James's dream, not mine." Sarah squeezed his hand. "I want a new dream. Our dream." Hope bloomed in his eyes. "You mean it?" "I've been thinking, lying here, about that couple you mentioned, the one who helps travelers. That sounds like a good life. Using our pasts to help others find better futures." "Arizona's nice this time of year," Colton said casually. "Lots of folks passing through, needing directions. Some might even need more than that. Second chances, fresh starts." "Will you still call me your midnight vow?" Sarah asked, remembering his whispered promises in the darkness. "Every night for the rest of our lives, if you'll let me." "Then yes, Arizona sounds perfect." He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, sealing their new beginning. Outside, Mercy's Bend was rebuilding itself, free from Harker's shadow. The federal marshals were cleaning house, Judge Carlton and his conspirators facing their own justice. But inside the quiet room, two scarred souls were already looking forward, toward horizons unmarked by violence or loss. The outlaw and the widow were dead, burned away in crucible of fire and lead. In their place, simply Colton and Sarah, bound by love forged in darkness and tempered in light. As Sarah drifted back to sleep, she heard Colton whispering plans, a small inn where travelers could rest, a place of safety in the wilderness. His voice painted pictures of peace, of purpose, of life lived together under endless western skies. The ranch widow who'd sworn off love had found it in the most unlikely place, in the arms of a reformed killer who'd taught her that sometimes the only law worth following was the one written in the heart. And though the journey had nearly killed them both, Sarah knew with bone-deep certainty that every bullet, every scar, every moment of terror had been worth it, because she'd learned the most important lesson the West had to offer, that love, real love, was worth fighting for, worth dying for, but most importantly, worth living for. "Rest now," Colton murmured. "When you're healed, we ride for our new life." Sarah smiled, already dreaming of Arizona sunsets and the adventures yet to come. The past was prologue. The future was theirs to write, together. 10 years had passed since that bloody day in Mercy's Bend, and the desert sunrise still took Sarah's breath away. She stood on the porch of the Desert Rose Inn, coffee steaming in her hands, watching the sky paint itself in shades of gold and crimson. The small town of Redemption Wells had grown around their establishment, drawn by the promise of honest lodging and fair treatment for all who passed through. "You're up early again," Colton said, joining her. His hair had more gray now, and the limp from that old wound was more pronounced in the morning. But his eyes still held that storm cloud intensity that had captured her heart so long ago. "Habit," Sarah replied, leaning into his warmth. "Besides, young Ben Miller's coming today. Wanted everything ready." Ben Miller, another lost soul seeking a new start. They'd received word from a friend in Texas that the boy was running from a bad situation, needed somewhere safe to figure out his next steps. It was what they did now, what the Desert Rose had become known for across the territories. "Coffee's ready," called out Maria, their cook and housekeeper, a widow herself, who'd shown up 3 years ago with 2 children and desperate eyes. Now she was family, like so many others who'd found refuge within these walls. The morning passed in comfortable routine. Colton tended to the horses while Sarah managed the books. 3 regular guests were staying, a traveling preacher, a couple heading to California to start a fruit farm, and old Samuel, a prospector who stopped by every few months to resupply and share outlandish stories. It was near noon when the rider appeared on the horizon, dust cloud announcing his approach. Sarah shaded her eyes, watching. Something in the set of those shoulders, the way he held himself in the saddle despite obvious exhaustion, reminded her of another desperate soul who'd once sought shelter. Ben Miller was younger than they'd expected, maybe 17, with haunted eyes and clothes that had seen too many hard miles. His hand hovered near his gun as he dismounted, scanning for threats. "Mrs. Gray?" He used the name they'd adopted, the fiction that kept their past buried. "I was told." "You were told right," Sarah said gently. "Come inside. You look like you could use a meal and rest." The boy's story came out over Maria's excellent stew. Father dead, uncle trying to force him into cattle rustling, a fight that ended with blood, and Ben running for his life. It was a familiar tale in different clothes. The West was full of young men pushed toward violence by circumstance. "I ain't a thief," Ben said fiercely. "But Uncle Zeke, he said it was that or starve. When I refused," he touched his split lip, evidence of the argument's end. Colton and Sarah exchanged glances. They'd seen this before, too many times, boys barely grown, standing at the crossroads between law and lawlessness, needing just one person to believe they could choose better. "You can stay as long as you need," Sarah offered. "We've got work if you're willing, honest work, tending horses, repairs, helping with guests." Hope flickered in the boy's eyes. "I'm good with horses, and I can read and cipher some. That's more than most." Colton said, "Tomorrow, we'll see what you can do. Tonight, rest." As they prepared the boy's room, Sarah noticed Colton watching him with an unreadable expression. She knew that look. He was seeing himself at that age, remembering his own crossroads. "He's got a chance," she said softly. "If he takes it." Colton's voice was gruff. "If he's strong enough to walk away from the easy wrong for the hard right." That evening, they gathered as always in the main room. Samuel regaled them with tales of lost gold mines. The preacher offered a gentle blessing, and the California couple shared their dreams of orange groves. Ben sat quiet in the corner, absorbing this strange world where strangers became family over shared meals. Later, as Sarah and Colton sat by their private fire, she asked, "Do you miss it? The excitement? The danger? Do you miss the ranch?" She considered. "Sometimes I dream about it, the view from the kitchen window, the sound of cattle, but it's like remembering someone else's life. That's how I feel about my outlaw days. Like watching a play about someone who looked like me but wasn't." He pulled her closer. "This is real. This life. This purpose. You." A knock interrupted them. Ben stood in the doorway, uncertain. Sorry to bother, but why do you do this? Take in strays like me? Colton smiled. Because someone once took a chance on me when I didn't deserve it. Showed me there was another way. Everyone deserves a second chance. Sarah added, sometimes they just need someone to believe it first. The boy nodded slowly, understanding beyond his years in his eyes. Thank you, both of you. As he left, Sarah saw the shift in him, spine a little straighter, hope a little stronger. Another soul pulled back from the edge. Think he'll make it? Colton asked. I think he's got as good a chance as we did. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire die to embers. Through the window, Redemption well slept peacefully, a town built on second chances and fresh starts. The desert rose stood at its heart, lighthouse for the lost, testament to the power of redemption. I got a letter today, Sarah said eventually. From Mercy's Bend, they're putting up a statue to those who stood against tyranny. Colton snorted. Bet they won't mention the outlaw and the widow who started it all. Would you want them to? No. He kissed her temple. Let them remember the legend. We've got something better. The truth. As they prepared for bed, Sarah paused at their dresser, fingers tracing the small framed photograph there, their wedding picture, taken by a traveling photographer in a small chapel outside Tucson. She barely recognized the woman in the image, scarred but smiling, standing beside a man who'd traded his guns for a gold band. Come to bed, Mrs. Gray. Colton called. Early morning tomorrow. Every morning's early with you, she teased, but joined him willingly. In the darkness, they held each other as they had for a decade now, two souls who'd found salvation in each other's arms. Outside, a coyote called to the moon, and somewhere in the inn, young Ben Miller slept safely for the first time in months. I love you, Sarah whispered into the darkness. And I love you. Colton replied, my midnight vow, my morning light, my redemption. She smiled against his chest, remembering another night, another vow, when a desperate woman opened her door to a bleeding stranger. The journey from that moment to this had been paid in blood and tears, in bullets and sacrifice. But lying here in their bed, in their home, surrounded by the life they'd built together, Sarah knew every step had been worth it. The ranch widow had sworn off love. True, but the woman she'd become, wife, partner, keeper of second chances, had found something greater than love. She'd found purpose, she'd found peace, she'd found home. In the morning, there would be guests to tend, Ben to train, Livs to touch. But for now, in the quiet darkness, there was only the two of them, proof that even the most broken souls could be mended, that even the bloodiest hands could learn to heal. The fire in the hearth burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls, shadows that no longer held fear, only the promise of another dawn, another day of the life they'd chosen together. And in that old photograph on the dresser, if you looked closely, you could see it in their eyes, the knowledge that love, real love, wasn't just worth fighting for. It was worth everything that came after. The quiet mornings, the shared purpose, the gentle touching of two hearts that had learned to beat as one. The outlaw and the widow were gone, their story already fading into legend. But Colton and Sarah Gray lived on, testimony to the truth that redemption wasn't just possible. It was as real as the desert sunrise, as solid as the walls they'd built, as enduring as the love that had transformed them both. In the Desert Rose Inn, at the crossroads of yesterday and tomorrow, they'd built their answer to all the darkness they'd known, a place where the lost could be found, where the broken could heal, where love could bloom even in the harshest ground. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining me on this wild journey through the American frontier. I hope Sarah and Colton's story touched your heart as much as it touched mine. Where are you listening to this tale of love and redemption? Leave a comment below and let me know, whether you're driving through the Texas plains, sitting by a cozy fire, or perhaps even somewhere in the modern Wild West. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about this story. Did you believe in their love? What would you have done in Sarah's boots? Let's discuss in the comments below.